They called her just support staff, a logistics coordinator who spent her days managing supply chains and inventory reports. But when 247 Marines found themselves trapped behind enemy lines with no way out, it was her unauthorized F-35 lightning strike that turned the tide of an impossible battle and saved every single life. This is the story of how quiet competence defeated loud arrogance, and why sometimes the most important battles are fought by those no one expects to fight at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Afghan sun blazed mercilessly over forward operating base Thunder, casting long shadows across the dusty compound as helicopters thundered overhead in endless rotations. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the concrete, mixing the acrid smell of diesel fuel with the ever-present dust that coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Inside the operations center, air conditioning units groaned against the relentless heat, while banks of monitors displayed real-time intelligence feeds from across the region. Captain Sarah Blackwood stood near the supply coordination station, her digital tablet clutched against her chest as she reviewed the morning's logistics reports. Her name tag read Supply Coordination Officer in crisp black letters. But to most of the combat personnel, she was simply invisible background noise in their world of high-stakes operations. The 28-year-old had short auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, intelligent green eyes that missed nothing, and a quiet intensity that most people mistook for timidity. What they didn't know was that before joining supply coordination, Sarah had been a top-tier F-35 pilot with over 400 combat hours logged across 2 deployments. Her transition to logistics hadn't been by choice, but rather the result of a controversial engagement review that questioned her aggressive tactics during a precision strike mission. The board had deemed her too emotionally invested and lacking the detached judgment required for combat aviation. The recommendation had been swift and final: transfer to supply coordination where her attention to detail could be better utilized. The morning briefing was already underway when Sarah entered the main operations room. Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the front, his weathered face grim as he pointed to a tactical map displayed on the wall-mounted screen. Around him, 24 officers leaned forward in their chairs, the tension in the room palpable as they absorbed the latest intelligence updates. "Gentlemen," Webb began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in the Marines, "we have a developing situation in Sector 7 Alpha. Intelligence indicates increased enemy movement in the Kandahar corridor, with multiple convoys reported moving south toward our patrol routes." Sarah found an empty chair near the back of the room and settled in quietly, opening her tablet to review supply manifests while listening to the briefing. She'd learned to multitask during these sessions, using the time to coordinate equipment deliveries and ammunition resupply, while keeping one ear on operational developments that might affect her logistics planning. Major Harrison Pike, the base's operations officer, stepped forward to provide tactical details. Pike was a career officer who'd earned his position through political maneuvering rather than combat excellence, and his briefings reflected his preference for safe, conventional approaches. "Sir, we've got Bravo Company on patrol in that sector, 24 Marines conducting a routine reconnaissance sweep. They're scheduled to return to base by 1400 hours. Colonel Webb nodded, studying the map with practiced eyes. "What's their current position?" "Approximately 12 clicks southeast of Checkpoint Delta. They reported normal activity as of 0630 this morning. No contact, no unusual observations." Sarah's head snapped up from her tablet. She'd been tracking supply convoys in that exact area for the past week, and the pattern of enemy movement that Pike was describing didn't match what she'd observed in the logistics data. Her supply trucks had been reporting increased checkpoints, unusual detours, and communication blackouts that suggested coordinated enemy activity far beyond what the intelligence briefing indicated. She raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, I have some information that might be relevant." Pike glanced at her with barely concealed irritation. "Captain Blackwood, this is a tactical briefing. Supply coordination reports can wait until after we've addressed operational priorities." "Major, with respect, this relates directly to the Sector 7 Alpha situation. My supply convoys have been encountering significant resistance in that area, and the pattern suggests—" "Captain," Pike interrupted, his voice taking on a condescending edge, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but convoy routes and combat operations are entirely different matters. Let's leave the tactical analysis to those qualified to provide it. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she pressed on. Sir, I've been tracking supply interdiction patterns that indicate coordinated enemy positioning. The data suggests a possible ambush setup in the exact area where Bravo Company is operating. The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning units. Sarah could feel 24 pairs of eyes on her, some curious, others dismissive, all wondering why the supply officer was attempting to contribute to a combat briefing. Colonel Webb studied her for a moment before speaking. Captain Blackwood, what exactly are you suggesting? Sarah stood, grateful for the opportunity to present her analysis. Sir, over the past 7 days, my supply convoys have encountered systematic interference in Sector 7 Alpha. Routes that were clear a week ago are now showing coordinated checkpoint activity. Communication dead zones that didn't exist before are appearing in a pattern that suggests deliberate signal jamming. Most significantly, the enemy isn't trying to destroy our convoys. They're forcing them to take alternative routes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. In my assessment, they're not interested in our supplies. They're mapping our response patterns, learning our alternative routes, and positioning assets for a larger operation. The pattern suggests they're preparing to isolate and eliminate a high-value target in that sector. Major Pike scoffed audibly. Captain, you're describing routine enemy harassment of supply lines. This is standard operating procedure for insurgent forces. There's no indication of coordinated large-scale operations. Sir, Sarah said, her voice gaining confidence, I've analyzed 7 separate convoy reports, correlated them with communication intercepts from the signal intelligence team, and cross-referenced the data with enemy activity patterns from the past 6 months. The level of coordination and the systematic nature of the interference indicates, Captain Blackwood, Pike cut her off sharply, you're a supply coordinator, not an intelligence analyst. Your job is to manage inventory and coordinate deliveries, not to interpret tactical situations that require specialized training and experience. Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but she knew her analysis was correct. Major, I have combat experience in this theater. I've flown over 50 strike missions in this exact region, and I understand enemy tactics and positioning. The pattern I'm seeing indicates, had combat experience. Pike corrected with emphasis. Past tense. You were transferred out of combat operations for a reason, Captain. I suggest you focus on your current responsibilities, rather than trying to relive your previous assignment. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's transfer from combat aviation was a sensitive topic, and Pike's public reference to it was both cruel and unprofessional. She could see several officers shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, aware that Pike had crossed a line but unwilling to challenge him in front of the colonel. Colonel Webb intervened before the situation could escalate further. That's enough, Major. Captain Blackwood, I appreciate your input, but we have established protocols for intelligence analysis and tactical planning. If you have specific concerns about supply security, please coordinate them through proper channels. Sarah nodded, her jaw clenched with frustration. Yes, sir. I'll prepare a detailed report for the intelligence section. See that you do, Webb replied. Now, let's continue with the operational briefing. As the briefing resumed, Sarah remained in her seat, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd observed. The enemy activity in Sector 7 Alpha wasn't random harassment. It was a carefully orchestrated preparation for something much larger. Bravo Company was walking into a trap, and no one in the command structure was taking her warnings seriously. She thought about the 24 Marines currently patrolling the area, young men who trusted their commanders to provide accurate intelligence and tactical support. They had no idea that enemy forces were systematically positioning themselves for what appeared to be a coordinated ambush operation. The briefing concluded with standard operational orders and routine administrative announcements. As officers began filing out of the room, Sarah approached Colonel Webb, hoping to have a private moment to discuss her concerns in more detail. Sir, Could I have a moment to discuss the Sector 7 Alpha situation? Webb checked his watch and shook his head. Captain, I have a conference call with Division Headquarters in 5 minutes. Submit your report through intelligence channels, and we'll review it through proper procedures. Sir, with respect, I believe there's an immediate threat to Bravo Company. The enemy positioning suggests they're preparing for a coordinated attack, possibly within the next several hours. Major Pike, who had been gathering his materials, looked up with obvious annoyance. Colonel, this is exactly what I was talking about. Captain Blackwood seems unable to accept that she's no longer in a combat role. She's creating unnecessary drama based on routine supply chain interference. Webb studied Sarah for a moment, his expression unreadable. Captain, Major Pike raises a valid point. You've been out of combat operations for over a year. Your current assignment is supply coordination, and that's where your focus should remain. Sarah felt desperation creeping into her voice. Sir, I'm not trying to overstep my authority. I'm trying to save Marine lives. The pattern I've identified indicates a significant threat that our current intelligence assessment is missing. Captain, Webb said firmly, I understand your concerns, but we have experienced intelligence officers and tactical planners whose job it is to assess threats and coordinate responses. Trust the system, Captain. It's worked for us so far. As the colonel left the room, Sarah stood alone among the scattered chairs and abandoned coffee cups, her warnings dismissed and her expertise disregarded. She knew with absolute certainty that Bravo Company was in mortal danger, but the command structure that should have been protecting them had instead chosen to silence the one person who could see the threat clearly. Outside the operations center, Sarah walked through the bustling compound, past mechanics servicing helicopters and Marines preparing for routine patrols. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal, given what she knew was developing in Sector 7 Alpha. In a few hours, if her analysis was correct, those routine patrols would become rescue missions, and the calm efficiency of the forward operating base would explode into crisis management. She made her way to the communications bunker, a reinforced concrete structure, where the base's signal intelligence team monitored radio traffic and electronic communications across the region. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez looked up from his monitoring station as she entered, his headphones pushed back around his neck. Captain Blackwood, what brings you to our little cave? Sarah had worked with Rodriguez on several occasions, coordinating communication schedules for supply convoys. He was one of the few people on the base who treated her opinions with professional respect rather than condescending dismissal. Mike, I need to ask you about signal intelligence from Sector 7 Alpha over the past week. Have you noticed any unusual patterns in enemy communications? Rodriguez turned to his computer terminal and pulled up the relevant files. Funny you should ask. We've been tracking increased chatter in that area, but it's mostly encrypted stuff we can't break. What's interesting is the timing. Very regular, very coordinated. Not the usual random insurgent traffic. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. What kind of timing patterns? Check this out, Rodriguez said, pointing to a series of timestamps. Every day at 0430, 0815, 1200 hours, and 1730. Like clockwork. That's not normal for insurgent operations. Usually their communications are sporadic, reactive. This looks more like scheduled coordination. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. And this started about a week ago? Pretty much. Whatever they're planning, they're taking their time to coordinate it properly. Mike, have you reported this to intelligence? Rodriguez shrugged. Sure, it's in the daily reports. But you know how it is. Unless we can actually decrypt the content, it just goes into the monitor and assess category. The brass doesn't get excited about encrypted chatter unless we can prove it's an immediate threat. Sarah thanked Rodriguez and left the communications bunker with one more piece of evidence supporting her analysis. The enemy wasn't just positioning assets randomly. They were following a coordinated timeline that suggested a specific operational plan. Combined with the systematic convoy interference and the positioning data she'd compiled, the picture was becoming undeniably clear. Bravo Company was walking into a carefully prepared kill zone, and despite her best efforts to warn the command structure, no one was listening to the supply coordinator who used to be one of their most effective combat pilots. As the afternoon sun climbed higher over forward operating base Thunder, Sarah Blackwood realized that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought by those in charge, but by those who cared enough to act when everyone else was looking the other way. The trap was set, the timeline was accelerating, and 24 Marines were about to discover that their survival depended on a woman whose warnings had been dismissed as the irrelevant concerns of support staff. But Sarah Blackwood wasn't just support staff. She was a warrior who had temporarily been assigned to a desk, and when the moment came to choose between following orders and saving lives, there would be no hesitation about which path she would take. The radio crackled to life at 1,347 hours, cutting through the afternoon quiet of forward operating base Thunder like a blade through silk. Sarah Blackwood was reviewing fuel allocation reports in her cramped office when the first distress call echoed through the compound's communication system, causing every conversation to stop and every head to turn toward the nearest speaker. Thunder Base, this is Bravo 6. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate air support. GPS coordinates follow. The voice of Lieutenant Marcus Chen, Bravo Company's commanding officer, carried the controlled tension of a professional soldier under extreme pressure, but Sarah could hear the underlying desperation that came from facing impossible odds. She dropped her tablet and ran toward the operations center, her boots pounding against the concrete as other personnel streamed from buildings across the compound. The scene that greeted her in the main operations room was controlled chaos, radio operators frantically coordinating with distant units, while intelligence officers scrambled to assess the tactical situation unfolding in Sector 7 Alpha. Colonel Webb stood at the central tactical display, his face grim as incoming reports painted an increasingly dire picture. Major Pike paced nearby, barking orders into his headset while trying to coordinate available resources. The large screen showed Bravo Company's position as a pulsing red dot, surrounded by estimated enemy positions marked in hostile orange. Sir, we've got 24 Marines pinned down in a valley complex approximately 14 clicks southeast of Checkpoint Delta, reported Captain Janet Morrison, the base intelligence officer. Initial assessment indicates they're facing a coordinated ambush involving at least 60 enemy combatants with prepared positions and heavy weapons. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The location was exactly where her analysis had predicted enemy forces would strike. Every piece of intelligence she had tried to share during the morning briefing was now playing out in real time, with American lives hanging in the balance. "What air assets do we have available?" Webb demanded. Major Pike consulted his tactical board. "Sir, we have 2 Apache gunships on station, but they're currently supporting operations in Sector 3 Bravo. Estimated time to redirect and reach Bravo Company is 45 minutes. We also have an AC-130 gunship available, but it's grounded for maintenance." 45 minutes? Webb's voice carried the weight of command decisions that measured time and lives. "What about fast movers? Nearest F-16s are operating out of Kandahar Air Base. Even with priority tasking, we're looking at 90 minutes minimum response time." Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Sir, we have F-35s on the flight line. I could be airborne in 15 minutes. The operations room fell silent except for the steady chatter of radio communications. Pike turned to face her with an expression of barely contained fury. "Captain Blackwood, you are not qualified for combat operations. Your flight status was revoked, and you are assigned to supply coordination duties." "Major, my flight certification is current, and I have more combat hours in the F-35 platform than any other pilot on this base. Those Marines don't have 90 minutes to wait for support from Kandahar." Colonel Webb studied her for a moment before shaking his head. "Captain, Major Pike is correct. You're not authorized for combat missions. We'll work with the assets we have available." Another radio transmission crackled through the speakers, this time with background sounds of intense gunfire and explosions. "Thunder Base, Bravo 6. We are taking casualties. Enemy forces have us surrounded with prepared positions on all sides. We need immediate air support, or we're not going to make it out of here." Sarah felt desperation clawing at her chest. "Sir, I'm telling you I can save those Marines. I know the terrain, I understand the tactical situation, and I have the skills to make precision strikes that can break their encirclement." Major Pike stepped closer, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. Captain, you were removed from flight status because you made unauthorized attacks that resulted in civilian casualties. Your judgment was deemed unreliable, and your emotional instability made you unsuitable for combat operations. That assessment hasn't changed. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Pike was referring to an incident 18 months earlier when she had engaged enemy forces who were using a school as a shield for their operations. Her precision strikes had eliminated the threat and saved dozens of civilian lives. But the review board had focused on her decision to engage without explicit authorization, rather than the successful outcome. That's not what happened, Sarah said quietly, and you know it. What happened, Pike continued, raising his voice so others in the room could hear, is that you demonstrated poor judgment under pressure and an inability to follow command protocols. That's exactly why you're not qualified for this type of mission. Captain Morrison interrupted the confrontation. Sir, Bravo Company is reporting that enemy forces are moving to tighten the encirclement. They estimate they have less than 2 hours before their position becomes completely untenable. Colonel Webb turned back to the tactical display, studying the enemy positions with the practiced eye of a career officer. What about helicopter insertion of additional ground forces? Sir, the enemy has positioned anti-aircraft weapons that make helicopter approach extremely dangerous. We'd likely lose the aircraft and the reinforcement team. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing frustration, seeing solutions that the command structure couldn't or wouldn't implement. The enemy positions were arranged in a classic ambush pattern, strong points on high ground with overlapping fields of fire, but vulnerable to precision strikes from specific approach angles that would require intimate knowledge of the terrain. She had flown strike missions in that exact area during her previous deployment, hitting similar enemy positions with devastating effectiveness. She knew every ridge, every valley, every approach vector that could allow an F-35 to deliver precision ordnance without endangering friendly forces. Sir, Sarah tried again, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. I've studied this exact situation. The enemy positioning is textbook. They're using the terrain features to channel our Marines into a kill zone while providing themselves with cover from conventional air support. But there are specific approach angles that would allow precision strikes to break their advantage. Colonel Webb looked at her with genuine curiosity for the first time. Explain. Sarah moved to the tactical display, pointing to specific terrain features visible on the satellite imagery. The enemy has positioned their heavy weapons on these ridgelines, creating interlocking fields of fire that prevent ground movement, but they're vulnerable to strikes from the northwest approach vector, coming in low through this valley system. The approach requires precise navigation and intimate knowledge of the terrain, but it would allow strikes on their command positions while minimizing risk to our Marines. Major Pike scoffed. Captain, you're describing a theoretical approach that might work in a simulation. Real combat involves variables that can't be accounted for in tactical planning. I've flown that exact approach, Sarah replied, her confidence growing. During Operation Desert Storm, I conducted 3 successful strikes against similar positions using the same terrain features. It's not theoretical, it's proven. Another radio transmission interrupted the discussion, this time with the sound of sustained automatic weapons fire in the background. Thunderbase, this is Bravo 6. We have multiple wounded and are running low on ammunition. We need air support now, not in an hour. The desperation in Lieutenant Chen's voice was unmistakable. Sarah could picture the young Marines hunkered down behind whatever cover they could find, watching their ammunition supplies dwindle while enemy forces prepared for a final assault. Colonel Webb made his decision. Major Pike, contact Kandahar Air Base and request emergency priority for F-16 support. Also reach out to any coalition forces in the area who might have available air assets. Sir, Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain professional, by the time those aircraft arrive, those Marines will be dead. I'm telling you I can save them right now. Pike whirled to face her, his face flushed with anger. Captain Blackwood, you are out of line and out of your depth. Your obsession with returning to combat operations is clouding your judgment. Those Marines need professional support, not some supply officer trying to relive her glory days. The insult struck deep, but Sarah forced herself to remain focused on the tactical situation. Major, this isn't about glory or personal ambition. This is about saving American lives using the most effective resources available. The most effective resource, Pike shot back, would be qualified pilots operating under proper command authority, not someone whose last combat mission resulted in a disciplinary review and transfer out of flight operations. Colonel Webb held up a hand to stop the argument. That's enough. Captain Morrison, what's the latest intelligence on enemy strength and positioning? Morrison consulted her reports before responding. Sir, current estimates indicate at least 80 enemy combatants in prepared positions. They appear to be well equipped with heavy weapons and have demonstrated sophisticated tactical coordination. This is not a hastily organized ambush. It's a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate an entire Marine unit. Sarah felt vindication mixed with dread. Her morning analysis had been correct, but being right provided no satisfaction when American lives were at stake. The systematic convoy interference, the coordinated communications patterns, the strategic positioning, everything had pointed to exactly this type of large-scale ambush operation. Sir, she said quietly, this is exactly what I tried to warn you about during this morning's briefing. The pattern of enemy activity indicated they were preparing for a coordinated attack against high-value targets in Sector 7 Alpha. Major Pike's expression hardened. Captain, your morning presentation was a collection of unrelated observations and speculation. There was no actionable intelligence that would have prevented this situation. There was actionable intelligence, Sarah replied, her frustration finally breaking through her professional demeanor. I identified systematic enemy coordination, predicted the likely target area, and recommended enhanced patrol security for operations in that sector. Every recommendation I made was dismissed without consideration. The radio crackled again, this time with sounds of close combat and shouted commands. Thunderbase, Bravo 6! Enemy forces are preparing for final assault. We need immediate air support or extraction. We cannot hold this position much longer. Colonel Webb stared at the tactical display, the weight of command decisions visible in his posture. Major Pike, what's the status on additional support? Sir, Apache gunships are still 30 minutes out. F-16s from Kandahar are at least 60 minutes. No other coalition assets are available in our time frame. Sarah stepped forward one final time, her voice steady with absolute conviction. Sir, I can be overhead in 12 minutes. I know the terrain, I understand the tactical situation, and I have the weapons and training necessary to break that ambush and save those Marines. Pike moved to block her access to Colonel Webb. Sir, I strongly recommend against authorizing Captain Blackwood for this mission. Her previous actions demonstrate poor judgment under pressure, and her current emotional state makes her unsuitable for complex combat operations. My emotional state, Sarah said, her voice rising, is professional concern for Marines who are about to die because this command structure is more interested in protecting bureaucratic procedures than saving American lives. What? The operations room fell silent except for the steady stream of radio communications from Bravo Company's increasingly desperate situation. Sarah could see officers and enlisted personnel throughout the room watching the confrontation, many of them sharing her frustration with the command structure's inflexibility. Colonel Webb studied Sarah for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Captain Blackwood, even if I were inclined to authorize your mission, Major Pike raises valid concerns about command protocol and operational authority. Combat missions require proper planning and coordination through established channels. Sarah felt her last hope slipping away. Sir, with respect, those Marines don't have time for proper planning and coordination. They need immediate air support, and I'm the only pilot on this base who can provide it. Another radio transmission cut through the tension, this time with the unmistakable sound of a wounded Marine calling for medical assistance. Thunderbase, this is Bravo 6. We have multiple casualties and are critically low on ammunition. Estimate we can hold position for maybe 20 more minutes before being overrun. The finality of Lieutenant Chen's report hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. 20 minutes to save 24 American Marines, and the only person capable of reaching them in time was being prevented from acting by the same command structure that had ignored her warnings. Sarah looked around the operations room one final time, seeing the faces of professional soldiers who understood the tactical situation but were bound by procedures and protocols that prioritized following orders over saving lives. She thought about the young Marines huddled in that distant valley, watching enemy forces prepare for a final assault while waiting for help that would arrive too late. Major Pike stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her ears. "Captain, I suggest you return to your office and focus on your assigned duties. This situation requires qualified personnel making professional decisions based on proper authority and proven judgment." Sarah met his gaze with steady determination. "And what happens when those Marines die because we followed proper authority instead of doing what was necessary?" Pike's expression hardened. "That's not your concern, Captain. Your concern is following orders and staying within your assigned role." As Sarah left the operations center, she could hear Colonel Webb coordinating with distant air assets and Major Pike issuing orders to personnel who lacked the capability to affect the situation in time. Behind her, the radio continued its grim countdown as Bravo Company reported their deteriorating situation with professional calm that barely concealed their knowledge of the approaching end. Outside the operations center, Sarah stood in the blazing Afghan sun and realized that sometimes the most important decisions weren't made by those in command, but by those who cared more about doing what was right than following what was safe. Bravo Company had less than 20 minutes to live, and the only person who could save them had just been ordered to return to her office and process supply reports, while American heroes died in a distant valley. But Sarah Blackwood had never been very good at following orders when lives were at stake. And today, 24 Marines were about to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, delivered by those who choose courage over compliance and action over authorization. The clock was ticking, the enemy was advancing, and somewhere in the distance an F-35 Lightning sat on the flight line, fueled and ready for someone brave enough to fly it into the jaws of hell. Sarah Blackwood walked through the compound with purposeful strides, her mind calculating distances, fuel loads, and weapons configurations as she moved past oblivious personnel going about their routine duties. The cacophony of base operations continued around her, mechanics working on vehicles, administrative staff hurrying between buildings, supply clerks managing inventory, all of them unaware that 24 American Marines were fighting for their lives less than 50 miles away. She reached her quarters and quickly changed into her flight suit, the familiar weight of the survival gear bringing back muscle memory from hundreds of combat missions. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she secured her survival radio, emergency medical kit, and personal sidearm. Each piece of equipment represented preparation for scenarios that most people preferred not to contemplate: being shot down behind enemy lines, surviving in hostile territory, fighting hand-to-hand when all other options were exhausted. The flight line stretched across the eastern edge of Forward Operating Base Thunder, a concrete expanse that shimmered in the afternoon heat, where millions of dollars worth of military aircraft sat in various states of readiness. Sarah approached the F-35A Lightning II, designated as tail number 125047, a sleek predator that represented the pinnacle of modern aviation technology. Unlike the older aircraft she had trained on, the F-35 integrated stealth capabilities, advanced sensors, and precision weapon systems into a platform that could dominate any battlefield. Staff Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez was performing routine maintenance checks when Sarah approached, his coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and his tool belt weighted down with specialized equipment. Rodriguez had been maintaining F-35s for 6 years and knew every system, every component, every potential failure point that could affect aircraft performance. "Captain Blackwood," he said, looking up from his diagnostic tablet with surprise. "I wasn't expecting flight operations this afternoon. Is there a scheduled mission I missed?" Sarah felt the weight of her deception settling on her shoulders, but the radio chatter from Bravo Company left no room for hesitation. "Tommy, I need you to prep 5047 for immediate launch, full weapons load with precision-guided munitions." Rodriguez consulted his maintenance log. "Ma'am, this bird is green across the board, but I don't have any authorization for weapons loading." Major Pike usually coordinates all ordnance requirements through the armaments section. "This is an emergency authorization," Sarah said, hoping her voice carried more confidence than she felt. "Bravo Company is in contact and needs immediate close air support. Every minute we delay costs American lives." The sergeant's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as he processed the tactical situation. Like most enlisted personnel, Rodriguez had tremendous respect for the Marines and understood the brotherhood that connected all military personnel regardless of service branch. The idea that Marines were dying while paperwork delayed their support was anathema to everything he believed about military service. "What kind of ordnance do you need, Captain?" Sarah mentally reviewed the tactical situation based on the intelligence reports she had observed. 4 GBU-12 Paveway, 2 laser-guided bombs, and 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. I need precision weapons that can eliminate point targets without creating excessive blast effects that might endanger friendly forces. Rodriguez nodded and signaled to his weapons team. Within minutes, ground crews were maneuvering ordnance carts across the flight line, while technicians began the complex process of mounting precision-guided weapons on the F-35's internal weapons bays. The choreographed efficiency of the loading process reflected years of training and experience, each crew member understanding their role in preparing America's most advanced fighter for combat operations. While the weapons loading proceeded, Sarah conducted her pre-flight inspection with methodical thoroughness. She checked hydraulic systems, verified electrical connections, tested flight control surfaces, and reviewed engine parameters with the focused intensity of a pilot who understood that equipment failure in combat meant death. The F-35 systems responded perfectly to each diagnostic test, confirming that the aircraft was ready for the demanding mission ahead. 25 minutes after leaving the operations center, Sarah was strapped into the cockpit of tail number 125047, running through the final pre-flight checklist while ground crews cleared the area around the aircraft. The F-35's advanced avionics systems came online with electronic precision, displaying tactical information, navigation data, and weapons status on high-resolution screens that provided unprecedented situational awareness. The radio crackled in her headset as she contacted the control tower for takeoff clearance. "Thunder Tower, this is Lightning 5047 requesting immediate departure for close air support mission." The tower controller's response carried confusion and concern. "Lightning 5047, I show no scheduled flight operations for your aircraft. Please confirm authorization for departure." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that her unauthorized mission was about to be exposed. "Tower, this is an emergency launch in response to troops in contact. Authorization is being processed through operational channels." A different voice came on the radio, Major Pike's unmistakable tone filled with fury. "Lightning 5047, this is Major Pike. You are ordered to shut down engines immediately and return to the flight line. You do not have authorization for this mission." Sarah switched to the emergency frequency that Bravo Company was using and heard Lieutenant Chen's increasingly desperate reports. "Thunderbase, Bravo 6. Enemy forces are advancing on our position. We have wounded Marines who cannot be moved and insufficient ammunition for sustained defense. If air support doesn't arrive in the next 10 minutes, we will be overrun." The choice crystallized with absolute clarity. She could follow Major Pike's orders, shut down her engines, and watch 24 Marines die while following proper protocol. Or she could ignore military authority, launch an unauthorized combat mission, and accept the consequences of choosing lives over regulations. "Tower, Lightning 5047 is declaring emergency authority and departing immediately for life-saving mission." Sarah advanced the throttles and felt the F-35's powerful engine respond with a surge of thrust that pressed her back into the ejection seat. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the barely controlled violence of 40,000 pounds of thrust overcoming gravity and physics, transforming potential energy into kinetic motion that would carry precision weapons to Marines who needed them more than they needed their next breath. As the F-35 lifted off from forward operating base Thunder, Sarah could see Major Pike's staff car racing toward the flight line, its emergency lights flashing as he attempted to physically prevent her departure. But the laws of physics had already taken control. Once an F-35 reaches rotation speed, it belongs to the sky rather than the ground, and no amount of military authority can call it back to Earth. The aircraft climbed rapidly through the thin desert air, its advanced navigation systems automatically calculating the most efficient route to Bravo Company's position in Sector 7 Alpha. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of flight training and combat experience, configuring systems for low-altitude precision strike operations while maintaining awareness of potential threats throughout the operational area. At 15,000 feet, she leveled off and engaged the F-35's advanced sensor package, immediately gaining detailed intelligence about the tactical situation developing around Bravo Company's position. The aircraft's electro-optical targeting system provided high-resolution imagery that revealed the full scope of the ambush. At least 90 enemy combatants positioned in carefully prepared fighting positions that created interlocking fields of fire around the trapped Marines. The enemy tactical disposition was even more sophisticated than initial intelligence reports had indicated. Heavy weapons positions on commanding terrain provided overwatch and fire support while assault teams maneuvered to tighten the encirclement. Communication intercepts suggested coordinated timing for a final assault that would overwhelm the Marines' defensive perimeter within minutes. Sarah studied the enemy positions with the analytical precision of a combat pilot who understood that successful strikes required intimate knowledge of target priorities and collateral damage considerations. The Marines were positioned in a shallow depression that provided minimal cover from enemy fire but excellent protection from nearby ordnance detonations, assuming precision placement of guided weapons. She switched to Bravo Company's frequency and established direct communication with Lieutenant Chen. Bravo 6, this is Lightning 5047 inbound for immediate close air support. What is your current tactical situation? The relief in Chen's voice was palpable. Lightning 5047 Bravo 6. We are surrounded by estimated 90 enemy combatants with heavy weapons on elevated positions. We have 7 wounded Marines and are critically low on ammunition. Enemy assault appears imminent. Sarah studied the tactical display while maintaining her approach to the target area. Bravo 6, I need you to mark your exact position with infrared strobes and pull your personnel back to the eastern edge of your perimeter. I'm going to conduct precision strikes on the enemy command positions, but I need maximum separation to avoid fratricide. Roger, Lightning 5047. Infrared strobes activated. All personnel moving to eastern perimeter. Be advised, enemy heavy weapons include anti-aircraft systems that may engage your aircraft. Sarah acknowledged the warning while configuring her weapons systems for the first strike. The enemy anti-aircraft threat was significant, but the F-35's stealth characteristics and electronic warfare capabilities provided substantial protection against older surface-to-air missile systems commonly used by insurgent forces. She initiated her attack run from the northwest, using the terrain masking that she had described during the morning briefing to approach the target area below enemy radar coverage. The F-35 descended to 800 feet above ground level, flying through mountain valleys with precision that required intimate knowledge of the terrain and absolute confidence in the aircraft's navigation systems. The first target was the enemy command position located on a ridgeline that provided observation and fire control for the entire ambush operation. Sarah designated the target using the aircraft's advanced targeting pod and watched as the laser-guided bomb seeker head locked onto the precise coordinates where enemy commanders were coordinating the assault against Bravo Company. Bravo 6, Lightning 5047. Weapon away. Keep your people down for 30 seconds. The GBU-12 Paveway 2 separated from the F-35's internal weapons bay and followed its laser guidance with mechanical precision, adjusting its flight path to compensate for wind conditions and target movement, while Sarah maintained laser designation from a safe distance. The explosion erupted against the ridgeline with devastating effect, eliminating the enemy command position and disrupting the coordinated assault that had been building toward its climax. Sarah immediately maneuvered for the second strike, targeting a heavy weapons position that had been providing suppressive fire against the Marines' defensive perimeter. The enemy gun crew had no warning before the precision-guided munition eliminated their position with surgical accuracy, creating a gap in the encirclement that the Marines could potentially exploit for tactical movement. Enemy anti-aircraft fire began reaching toward the F-35 as insurgent forces recognized the threat posed by American air power. Sarah executed evasive maneuvers that pushed the aircraft's performance envelope while maintaining target acquisition for additional strikes. The F-35's advanced flight control systems automatically compensated for the extreme maneuvering, allowing her to maintain weapons accuracy despite pulling gravitational forces that would have incapacitated less experienced pilots. The third strike targeted a mortar position that had been raining indirect fire on Bravo Company's location. Sarah's precision attack eliminated the mortar crew and their equipment, removing a significant threat while creating additional chaos among enemy forces who were beginning to realize that their carefully planned ambush was being systematically destroyed by a single aircraft. Lightning 5047. This is Bravo 6. Outstanding work. Enemy forces are withdrawing from several positions. We're seeing significant reduction in incoming fire. Sarah continued her attack pattern, using the F-35 sensors to identify and prioritize remaining threats while coordinating with Bravo Company to ensure friendly forces remained clear of target areas. Her fourth precision strike eliminated a sniper position that had been preventing Marine movement, while her fifth attack destroyed an ammunition cache that created secondary explosions throughout the enemy defensive network. The sixth and final precision strike targeted the last organized enemy position, a machine gun nest that commanded the primary escape route from the ambush site. Sarah's Hellfire missile eliminated the position with devastating accuracy, opening a corridor that would allow Bravo Company to withdraw from their exposed position to more defensible terrain. Bravo 6, Lightning 5047, all primary threats neutralized. You have a clear withdrawal route to the northeast. I'll provide overwatch while you move your wounded. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried exhaustion mixed with overwhelming gratitude. Lightning 5047, Bravo 6. You just saved 24 Marine lives. We're beginning tactical withdrawal with wounded. Cannot express adequate appreciation for your support. Sarah maintained orbit over the battlefield. While Bravo Company conducted their withdrawal, her sensors continuously scanning for remaining threats or enemy reinforcements that might compromise the Marines' movement to safety. The F-35's advanced systems provided real-time intelligence that allowed her to guide the ground forces through the safest routes, while maintaining awareness of potential threats throughout the operational area. 47 minutes after departing forward operating base Thunder without authorization, Sarah had successfully eliminated the coordinated enemy ambush that would have killed 24 American Marines. The tactical situation had been reversed through precision application of air power, transforming certain defeat into tactical victory through the courage to act when action was necessary rather than authorized. As Bravo Company reached defensive positions that would allow medical evacuation of their wounded personnel, Sarah turned the F-35 toward home base, knowing that her unauthorized mission had saved American lives but also knowing that the consequences of her actions were just beginning. The radio crackled with transmissions from forward operating base Thunder, as multiple voices demanded her immediate return and submission to military authority. Major Pike's fury was evident even through electronic distortion, while Colonel Webb's communications carried the weight of command decisions that would determine her future in the United States Marine Corps. But as Sarah flew through the Afghan sky toward an uncertain future, she felt the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that courage and competence had triumphed over bureaucracy and cowardice. 24 Marines would return home to their families because someone had been willing to choose action over authorization, lives over regulations, and mission accomplishment over personal safety. The sun was beginning to set over the Hindu Kush Mountains as the F-35 approached forward operating base Thunder, its mission complete and its pilot ready to face whatever consequences awaited her on the ground. She had proven that sometimes the most important victories are won by those who care more about doing what is right than following what is safe. The F-35 Lightning II touched down on the runway at forward operating base Thunder as the setting sun painted the desert landscape in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Sarah Blackwood felt the familiar sensation of wheels meeting concrete, the aircraft's advanced landing systems automatically adjusting to crosswinds and runway conditions with precision that still amazed her after years of military aviation. As she taxied toward the flight line, she could see a convoy of vehicles racing toward her aircraft. Security personnel, senior officers, and medical teams, all converging on what would undoubtedly become the most controversial landing in the base's operational history. The moment Sarah shut down the F-35's engine and opened the canopy, she was surrounded by armed security personnel under the direct command of Major Pike, whose face displayed a level of fury that bordered on apoplectic rage. Colonel Webb stood nearby with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but clearly indicating that serious consequences were about to unfold. The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins, had apparently been summoned from division headquarters specifically to address the unauthorized combat mission that had just concluded. Captain Sarah Blackwood, Major Pike announced with barely controlled venom, "You are under arrest for theft of military property, unauthorized use of aircraft, violation of direct orders, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, and reckless endangerment of personnel and equipment. You will be escorted to the base detention facility pending formal charges and court-martial proceedings." Sarah climbed down from the aircraft with deliberate calm, removing her helmet and flight gloves while maintaining the professional bearing that had defined her military career. She understood that her actions had crossed lines that military protocol considered inviolate, but she also knew that 24 American Marines were alive because someone had been willing to prioritize mission accomplishment over bureaucratic approval. General Hawkins stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the fading daylight, and her command presence immediately establishing authority over the chaotic scene. Patricia Hawkins had earned her stars through 3 decades of distinguished service that included combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and her reputation for fair but decisive leadership was legendary throughout the Marine Corps. "Captain Blackwood," the general said, her voice carrying the weight of ultimate military authority. "Before we address the serious charges that Major Pike has outlined, I want to understand exactly what transpired during your unauthorized mission. You will provide a complete tactical briefing on your combat operations, including target selection, weapons employment, and coordination with ground forces." Sarah straightened to attention, recognizing that this moment would define not only her military career, but also establish precedent for how the Marine Corps would handle similar situations in the future. "Ma'am, at approximately 1,415 hours, I departed Forward Operating Base Thunder in F-35A tail number 12-5047 to provide immediate close air support to Bravo Company, which was engaged in combat with numerically superior enemy forces in Sector 7 Alpha." She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing with the precision that characterized professional military briefings. Intelligence indicated that Bravo Company was facing a coordinated ambush involving approximately 90 enemy combatants in prepared defensive positions. The Marines were surrounded, taking casualties and running critically low on ammunition, with no air support available within their tactical time frame. General Hawkins consulted a tablet containing real-time intelligence reports. "Captain, what was the actual tactical situation when you arrived in the target area?" Sarah's confidence grew as she shifted into the analytical mindset that had made her an exceptional combat pilot. "Ma'am, enemy forces had established a sophisticated ambush using terrain features to create interlocking fields of fire around Bravo Company's position. Heavy weapons on elevated positions provided overwatch while assault teams maneuvered to complete the encirclement. Based on radio communications, the Marines had perhaps 10 minutes before being overrun." Major Pike interrupted with obvious skepticism. "General, Captain Blackwood's assessment cannot be verified through independent sources. Her description of enemy strength and positioning may be exaggerated to justify her unauthorized actions." Sarah turned to face Pike directly, her voice steady with absolute conviction. "Major, every aspect of my tactical assessment can be verified through F-35 sensor data, which was automatically recorded throughout the mission. The aircraft's advanced targeting systems documented enemy positions, weapon systems, and tactical dispositions with precision that exceeds human observation capabilities." General Hawkins made a note on her tablet. "Captain, describe your weapons employment and the tactical effects achieved." Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction that came from discussing successful combat operations. "Ma'am, I conducted 6 precision strikes using laser-guided bombs and Hellfire missiles against priority targets identified through systematic analysis of enemy defensive positions. First strike eliminated the command position coordinating enemy operations. Subsequent strikes targeted heavy weapons positions, indirect fire assets, and key terrain that controlled Marine withdrawal routes." She gestured toward the tactical display that had been set up near the aircraft. "All weapons were employed with precision guidance and minimal collateral damage, achieving tactical effects that disrupted enemy coordination and created gaps in their encirclement. This allowed Bravo Company to conduct tactical withdrawal with their wounded personnel to secure positions where medical evacuation could be conducted safely." Colonel Webb, who had remained silent throughout the initial exchanges, stepped forward with obvious concern. "Captain, regardless of the mission's tactical success, you violated direct orders and launched an unauthorized combat operation. Military discipline requires adherence to command authority and proper authorization procedures." Sarah met the colonel's gaze with quiet determination. "Sir, I respectfully acknowledge that my actions violated standard protocols. However, those protocols would have resulted in the deaths of 24 American Marines while we waited for proper authorization that would have arrived too late to affect the tactical situation." General Hawkins studied the tactical data on her tablet before looking up at the assembled officers. "Gentlemen, I've just received confirmation from Bravo Company that all personnel have been successfully evacuated to secure positions. 7 Marines required medical treatment for combat injuries, but all are expected to make full recoveries. Lieutenant Chen's after-action report specifically credits Captain Blackwood's air support with preventing what would have been a complete loss of his unit. The general's words hung in the desert air like the sound of distant thunder, fundamentally altering the dynamic of the confrontation. Sarah felt a surge of vindication, knowing that her tactical assessment and mission execution had been validated by the ground forces she had been sent to support. Major Pike's expression grew even darker as he realized that the tactical success of Sarah's mission complicated his efforts to pursue serious disciplinary action. General, tactical success does not excuse violation of military law and breach of command authority. Captain Blackwood's actions set a dangerous precedent that could undermine military discipline and proper chain of command procedures. Sarah found herself speaking before she consciously decided to respond. Major, what undermines military discipline is a command structure that prioritizes following procedures over accomplishing missions and saving American lives. Those Marines were dying because this base's leadership was more concerned with proper authorization than effective action. The boldness of her statement created immediate tension among the assembled officers. Colonel Webb looked shocked at her direct challenge to military authority, while Major Pike appeared ready to add insubordination to the growing list of charges against her. General Hawkins held up a hand to prevent further escalation. Captain Blackwood, your tactical success is noted and appreciated, but Major Pike raises legitimate concerns about military discipline and command authority. Your unauthorized actions, regardless of their outcome, represent a serious breach of military protocol that cannot be ignored. Sarah felt the weight of military justice settling around her like chains, but she refused to retreat from her position. General, I understand the serious nature of my actions and accept full responsibility for violating command protocols. However, I would make the same decision again under identical circumstances. Military protocol serves the mission, not the reverse. The general studied Sarah with the analytical gaze of a senior officer who had spent decades making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Captain, your willingness to accept responsibility is noted. However, the Marine Corps cannot function effectively if individual officers make independent decisions about when to follow orders and when to ignore them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached the group with obvious hesitation, carrying a tablet containing maintenance data from the F-35's mission systems. General, ma'am, I have the aircraft's mission data recorder information if you'd like to review the tactical details of Captain Blackwood's engagement. General Hawkins accepted the tablet and spent several minutes reviewing the recorded sensor data, weapons employment logs, and communication transcripts from Sarah's combat mission. The F-35's advanced systems had documented every aspect of the engagement with technological precision that provided irrefutable evidence of the tactical situation and mission effectiveness. Captain Blackwood, the general said finally, this mission data confirms your tactical assessment and demonstrates exceptional piloting skill under extremely challenging combat conditions. Your precision weapons employment eliminated significant threats while maintaining appropriate separation from friendly forces. She paused, clearly weighing the implications of her next words. However, your unauthorized departure and violation of direct orders represent serious breaches of military discipline that require formal administrative action. Colonel Webb stepped forward with obvious relief that the situation was moving toward resolution. General, I recommend that Captain Blackwood be processed for court-martial on charges of unauthorized use of military property and violation of direct orders. The tactical success of her mission should be considered as mitigating circumstances during sentencing. Sarah felt her military career slipping away, but she maintained her professional composure while preparing to accept the consequences of choosing mission accomplishment over personal safety. She had saved 24 American lives, and no punishment could diminish the value of that achievement. General Hawkins closed the tablet and addressed the assembled group with the authority that came from ultimate command responsibility. Gentlemen, after reviewing all available evidence and considering the tactical circumstances that led to Captain Blackwood's actions, I am making the following determinations. The desert evening fell silent, except for the distant sound of aircraft operations and the hum of base activities continuing around them. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she prepared to learn her fate. First, the general continued, Captain Blackwood's tactical analysis of enemy activity in Sector 7 Alpha was accurate and should have been given serious consideration during morning intelligence briefings. Her warnings about coordinated enemy operations were dismissed without proper evaluation, contributing to the tactical situation that endangered Bravo Company. Major Pike's face grew pale as he realized the general's assessment was shifting toward criticism of the command structure rather than condemnation of Sarah's unauthorized actions. Second, Captain Blackwood's combat mission was executed with exceptional skill and achieved tactical objectives that directly saved American lives. Her weapons employment was precise, her coordination with ground forces was professional, and her overall mission effectiveness was outstanding. General Hawkins turned to face Major Pike directly. "Major, your handling of Captain Blackwood's intelligence contributions and your dismissal of qualified personnel, based on personal bias rather than professional competence, will be the subject of formal investigation. The Marine Corps cannot afford to waste valuable resources because of outdated attitudes about gender roles in combat operations." The Major's expression shifted from anger to concern as he realized that his own career was now under scrutiny. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and professional satisfaction, knowing that systemic problems were finally being addressed by senior leadership who understood the importance of merit-based evaluation. Third, the general continued, "While Captain Blackwood's unauthorized mission violated established protocols, her actions were taken in response to immediate threats to American personnel and achieved mission objectives that prevented significant casualties. Under these exceptional circumstances, formal disciplinary action would not serve the interests of military justice or operational effectiveness." Sarah felt disbelief washing over her as the general's words sank in. Instead of court-martial and imprisonment, she was apparently being exonerated, based on the tactical necessity of her actions and the failure of command structure to respond appropriately to legitimate intelligence warnings. General Hawkins addressed Sarah directly. "Captain Blackwood, effective immediately, you are restored to full flight status and assigned as the base's senior combat pilot with responsibility for close air support operations. Your demonstrated expertise in tactical analysis and combat effectiveness are valuable resources that this command has clearly underutilized." The transformation was so dramatic that Sarah struggled to process the implications. In the span of one afternoon, she had gone from dismissed supply coordinator to arrested criminal to vindicated hero and senior pilot. The journey reflected not just personal redemption, but systemic recognition that competence and courage were more valuable than compliance and conformity. Colonel Webb stepped forward with obvious confusion about his role in the developing situation. "General, what are the implications for base command structure and operational procedures going forward?" General Hawkins smiled for the first time during the confrontation. "Colonel, this base is going to implement new protocols that emphasize mission accomplishment over bureaucratic compliance. We're going to listen to our qualified personnel regardless of their current assignment, and we're going to make decisions based on tactical necessity rather than administrative convenience." She gestured towards Sarah. "Captain Blackwood's actions today demonstrate that our most valuable assets aren't always found in the positions where we expect them. Sometimes courage and competence emerge from unexpected places, and military leadership must be flexible enough to recognize and utilize these resources effectively." As the desert stars began appearing in the darkening sky above forward operating base Thunder, Sarah Blackwood realized that her unauthorized combat mission had accomplished more than saving 24 Marines. It had demonstrated that individual courage could challenge institutional inertia, that professional competence could overcome personal bias, and that sometimes the most important victories were achieved by those who chose action over approval. 6 months later, Major Sarah Blackwood stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Close Air Support Operations Center, watching as the latest class of combat pilots practiced precision strike techniques over the Afghan desert. The building hummed with activity as tactical coordinators, intelligence analysts, and operational planners worked together to provide seamless support for ground forces throughout the region. Through the reinforced windows, she could see F-35 Lightning aircraft conducting training missions that emphasized the integration of advanced sensor systems with traditional combat skills. The pilots were learning that technology enhanced rather than replaced human judgment, and that the most effective combat operations resulted from combining mechanical precision with intuitive understanding of tactical situations. Lieutenant Jennifer Martinez approached with a mission briefing folder, her flight suit bearing the wings and insignia that marked her as one of the base's newest combat pilots. Martinez was part of the growing number of female aviators who had been attracted to Forward Operating Base Thunder by its reputation for merit-based evaluation and professional development opportunities. "Major Blackwood," Martinez said with obvious respect, "the afternoon training missions are ready for your approval. We have 6 pilots scheduled for precision strike training and 4 more conducting close air support coordination with ground forces." Sarah reviewed the training schedule with satisfaction, noting that the exercises emphasized the kind of tactical thinking and independent decision-making that had proven crucial during real combat operations. The pilots were learning to trust their instincts, analyze complex situations, and take decisive action when circumstances demanded immediate response. "Excellent work, Lieutenant. Make sure the pilots understand that these training scenarios are based on actual combat situations where quick thinking and precise execution saved American lives." Martinez nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, ma'am. They all know the story of Bravo Company and how your unauthorized mission changed everything about how this base approaches combat operations." Sarah smiled, remembering the young Marines who had trusted her to save their lives when everyone else had given up on them. "Lieutenant, the most important lesson from that mission isn't about breaking rules or ignoring authority. It's about understanding that our primary mission is protecting American lives and accomplishing objectives that matter. Everything else is just procedure." The radio crackled with reports from the training missions, filled with the professional communications of pilots learning to coordinate complex operations under challenging conditions. Sarah listened to the familiar cadence of military aviation, recognizing the confidence and competence that came from proper training combined with practical experience. Her personal office displayed commendations from Marine Corps headquarters, letters of appreciation from the families of Bravo Company Marines, and photographs from change of command ceremonies where she had been recognized as one of the most effective combat leaders in the theater of operations. But the decoration that meant the most was a simple handwritten note from Lieutenant Chen, expressing gratitude for her willingness to risk everything to save his Marines. Colonel Webb, who had been promoted to Deputy Base Commander, entered her office with the latest operational reports. His attitude towards Sarah had transformed completely since the events 6 months earlier, evolving from skeptical tolerance to genuine professional respect and personal admiration. "Sarah," he said, using the informal address that reflected their improved working relationship, "I wanted to update you on the investigation results from Washington. Major Pike has been reassigned to administrative duties at Marine Corps headquarters, and several other officers have been counseled about their handling of qualified female personnel." Sarah nodded with quiet satisfaction. "The important thing is that systemic changes have been implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. We can't afford to waste talent because of personal prejudices or institutional inertia." Colonel Webb consulted his notes before continuing. "The Pentagon has also approved your recommendation for the Advanced Combat Leadership Academy. You'll be teaching the next generation of combat pilots about tactical decision-making and mission-focused leadership." The opportunity represented everything Sarah had hoped to achieve during her military career: the chance to influence future leaders and ensure that competence and courage would be recognized and rewarded, regardless of gender or current assignment. She would be teaching officers who would face impossible decisions under extreme pressure, and her experiences would help them understand that sometimes the most important actions required personal risk and professional sacrifice. "When do I report for the assignment?" Sarah asked. "Next month. But first, you have one more mission here. The Secretary of Defense is visiting Forward Operating Base Thunder to observe our innovative combat training programs. She specifically requested a demonstration of your tactical coordination methods." The irony was perfect. A year ago, Sarah had been dismissed as a supply coordinator whose opinions didn't matter, and whose expertise was considered irrelevant to military operations. Now, the highest levels of Department of Defense leadership were seeking her insights on combat effectiveness and organizational leadership. As Colonel Webb left her office, Sarah returned her attention to the window overlooking the flight line. In the distance, she could see F-35 aircraft returning from training missions, their pilots gaining the experience and confidence that would serve them during actual combat operations. Each of them represented the future of American military aviation, professional warriors who understood that technology and tradition must be combined with individual courage and institutional flexibility. The story of her unauthorized mission had become legend throughout the Marine Corps, inspiring other officers to trust their professional judgment and take decisive action when circumstances demanded immediate response. But more importantly, it had demonstrated that military effectiveness required organizations to recognize and utilize talent regardless of where it was found or how it challenged conventional expectations. Sarah touched the pilot wings on her uniform and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had learned that the most important victories weren't always won through overwhelming force or advanced technology. Sometimes they were achieved by quiet persistence, unshakable conviction, and the courage to act when everyone else said it was impossible. The sun was setting over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reminded her of that afternoon when she had climbed alone into an F-35 and flown toward an uncertain future. She had risked everything to save Marines who couldn't save themselves, and in doing so, she had discovered that personal courage could change institutional culture, and individual actions could have consequences that extended far beyond their immediate tactical effects. As darkness fell over forward operating base Thunder, Major Sarah Blackwood knew that her story would continue to inspire others long after she had moved on to new challenges and different responsibilities. The precedent had been established that competence and courage were more valuable than compliance and conformity, and that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements came from those who were willing to risk everything for principles that mattered more than personal safety. 24 Marines had lived because someone cared more about saving lives than following procedures. And in a world that often overlooked those who spoke through actions rather than words, her story would remind future generations that presence didn't need permission, expertise didn't require authorization, and courage was most powerful when it emerged from unexpected places to accomplish missions that everyone else considered impossible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.